are ready to take this country in a fundamentally new direction. That's what's happening in America right now. Change is what's happening in America.
It's the end of the world as we know it. It's the...
In 2008, Barack Obama was elected to be the 44th President of the United States of America. His campaign captured the American people in a way that had not been seen in decades. His promises of hope and change brought people to the democratic cause. In fact, his win on November 4th was widely seen as the end of an era of conservatism, known as the conservative consensus. But was this really the end of the consensus, or was his win merely a stall in this era of conservatism? To understand the consensus, we need to know what it is. A conservative is one who believes in small government and traditional values, with little change over time, including little government involvement in social and economic aspects of America. A liberal is one who believes in bigger government for the sake of promoting freedom and equality within the economic and social, as well as political, factions of American society. Recently, the conservative views have been supported by the Republican Party, which favors business, and the liberal views have been favored by the Democratic Party, which favors the common man. The consensus itself is, essentially, the period of public support beginning in the 1970s for conservative policies. But when did the consensus actually begin? Well, this is how it worked. After World War II and the valiant four-term presidency of FDR, we had our Cold Warriors, Truman and Eisenhower. The terms of these two presidents brought a period of massive growth in the American economy and culture, a growth that would lead to an increase in public confidence in the American federal government. So, by the election of Kennedy in 1960, the American people believed that the federal government could solve not only economic troubles, but social problems as well. This shared belief was known as the liberal consensus. However, the terms to follow under Kennedy, Johnson, and Nixon proved the public otherwise. The failed Great Society reforms, the continuing civil rights violence, the Watergate scandal, the never-ending Vietnam War, the economic stagflation, the skyrocketing oil prices, they all led to a wake-up call for the American public. It had appeared that liberalism had failed them. Thus, by the time Reagan ran in 1980, America was disillusioned. The public no longer was in favor of big government policies. It was time for the American government to step back and return to the traditional values that had worked for America in years past. So, they elected Reagan in a landslide.
I did vote for Reagan in 1980. I had just turned 18 years old. I was at UC Berkeley. The left was marching through the streets saying he's Ronald Reagan.
I did my duty, I voted, but I didn't have the information I really needed to make an intelligent decision.
And I'm proud of that vote. I voted for him again in '84, and he was a great president.
The conservative consensus, as this shared belief became to be known as, had two central beliefs. One, the traditional pro-big business, laissez-faire policies of previous administrations had succeeded for those administrations. The federal government should return to those policies that had worked in years past. Two, it was not the federal government's job to intervene in the life of the individual. The federal government should tax individuals less and let them help themselves in their economic and social issues. In retrospect, these conservative policies have become very controversial.
Reagan was a great leader both on the economy and on national security.
Reagan did a lot of harm to this country.
He turned the country from Jimmy Carter's malaise and high inflation, high interest rates, high unemployment, to really, I guess he gets credit for much of the 30-year run of good economics.
They call it trickle down. It doesn't trickle down.
Reaganomics worked. He unleashed the power of the entrepreneur, the small business.
The conservatives believe in the free market.
Yeah.
A free market is like the Wild West. If you take away the laws, guess who runs the place? The bad guys.
Yeah.
The Reagan Revolution worked. It was effective. It was a successful presidency.
I think Reagan did a lot of damage.
The consensus and its popular support culminated in the conservative presidencies of the 80s and 90s, under Reagan, Bush, Clinton, and Bush. However, The 2008 election seemed like a reversal in conservative sentiment. Coming off of the 2006 interim elections, where the Democrats maintained a majority in the House and the independents in the Senate were swinging left, the elections in 2008 increased this margin. The country was thoroughly immersed in Obama's appeals for change and hope. It appeared, for at least several months, that the conservative consensus had ended. Obama's first few years in office supported this idea. The policy made in Washington had a much more liberal bent than in recent past, including the massive health care reform and the repeal of the Don't Ask, Don't Tell provision in the military. The massive spending on both the stimulus package and the health care bill seemed a throwback to the Great Society of the Johnson era and the deficit spending of FDR's New Deal. Some saw this liberalism as a sign of the end of the consensus.
If anything, things have gotten worse.
I think a lot of Americans are in shock at how far left the Democratic Party has gone.
The conservatives are becoming more radical, they're pushing harder, and I think they're making one fundamental mistake. If you have an agenda and you push it too far, there will be a backlash.
However, this period also saw the formation of the ultra-conservative Tea Party. The Tea Party gained great support, pulling the entire political spectrum rightward. In addition, the worsening economic situation, with unemployment steadily climbing from nearly 5% to around 8 to 10%, caused great disillusionment. Americans had lost patience. This sentiment directly led to the rightward swing in the 2010 elections. While the Democrats barely held the Senate, the left saw a loss of over 60 seats in the House, and also their position in the majority. Obama, in response, worked with the conservatives to compromise extending the Bush-era tax cuts in December of that year. The strength and duration of this backlash shows that conservatism is still an issue.
Do I think conservative ideals and ideas will be successful? I do. In 2010, you saw the country quickly move toward a more conservative, American liberty, concern about big government.
The things that conservatives push for have not changed and have gotten more out in the open.
After Obama was elected in 2008, President Obama, there was an article called The End of Conservatism, or The Death of Conservatism, by Sam Tannenhouse. I think he might be eating the pages of that book right now.
So what does this mean for 2012? Well, because conservative issues are still very prevalent, we are at a turning point, and this election will determine the direction. Either we will continue the conservatism of the consensus, or we will see a radical shift in the ideology across the spectrum. So this means that the major issues coming into the election will have to be examined from a conservative point of view. Firstly, the nation is reeling from a recession precipitated by the conservative deregulation of the banking sector. However, the stimulus package and regulation that helped prop up many large corporations was an obvious show of pro-big business policy. Due to the economic hardship, the government itself has had great difficulty with its own fiscal policy. The government has reached its debt ceiling. It needs more revenue. In this respect, the nation now seems to diverge from the cut taxes but not spending policies of the Reagan era. We now see candidates across the board adopting fiscal responsibility as part of their platforms. On another note, Congress, at Obama's urging, has passed a comprehensive healthcare overhaul, clearly defying the conservative precedents of limited welfare and social services. The bill protects patients and expands the role of government in providing healthcare. The conundrum lies in balancing the people's desire for simultaneously low taxes and extensive benefits. And how does conservatism influence the 2012 presidential election? Well, conservatism is offered in many flavors this year. Newt Gingrich was the Speaker of the House during Clinton's presidency. He represents the conservative figure of Reagan's era. Mitt Romney is the former governor of Massachusetts. Romney represents a corporate twist on conservative views. The intellectual grandfather of the Tea Party movement, Ron Paul, hails from Texas. He represents the advocates of very small, fiscally responsible government. Finally, Tim Pawlenty, the former governor of Minnesota, enjoys support from rural America. He favors the working-class conservatism of middle America.
So, the consensus of Reagan's time has probably seen the end of its days. However, conservatism is in no way out of the picture. The influence that the right will have in the future will be determined by your vote. Whether you're Republican or Democrat, liberal or conservative, you are American, and your duty is to be involved.
Whatever you believe in, go and be active.